The town of Millbrook had always been the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children rode their bikes until sunset without fear. Its brick storefronts, church bells, and quiet streets gave it the charm of a place untouched by the chaos of bigger cities. But in the summer of 2012, that picture-perfect image shattered. On a humid Tuesday evening, police officers were called to a small white house at the edge of town. Inside, they found the lifeless body of Rachel Turner, a 32-year-old accountant who had been well known for her kindness and reliability. At first glance, nothing in the room seemed disturbed. There were no broken locks, no shattered glass, and no signs of a struggle. Her home was neat, her belongings untouched, and yet, something was terribly wrong. The coroner's report revealed that Rachel had not died from natural causes. A lethal poison had been slipped into her system, most likely through something she had consumed. That single detail changed the entire scope of the investigation. Poison was not the weapon of choice in random attacks. It was slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. Whoever had killed Rachel hadn't just wanted her gone. They wanted her to suffer, and they wanted the act to remain invisible until it was too late. The news spread quickly through Millbrook, leaving neighbors stunned. Rachel was someone they trusted, someone who handled taxes, savings, and financial planning for local families. The thought that anyone would wish her harm seemed impossible. But police knew the lack of forced entry meant Rachel likely knew her killer. She had let them inside her home, possibly even shared a meal or drink with them, never suspecting she was sealing her own fate. What seemed like an isolated tragedy was about to unravel into something far darker. As investigators began to peel back the layers of Rachel Turner's life, they quickly realized that her reputation as a quiet, hard-working accountant only told part of the story. Rachel had always been careful with her image, keeping her personal affairs private, but her computer files and journals suggested she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than her neighbors could ever have imagined. Bank records revealed a trail of money that didn't match her modest lifestyle. Transfers were moving in and out of accounts linked to wealthy clients, and at the center of it all was one name that stood out repeatedly: Evelyn Cross. Evelyn was a widow in her late 50s, admired by many in Millbrook for her generous donations to charities and her ability to maintain an air of grace and sophistication. But beneath her polished image, whispers had followed her for years. Business partners who felt cheated, employees who left suddenly, and acquaintances who described her as both magnetic and intimidating painted a very different picture. Rachel had not only worked with Evelyn, she had managed sensitive financial dealings that hinted at hidden fortunes and questionable transactions. But Evelyn was not the only one tied to Rachel. Two other women, Margaret Hale and Lillian Price, appeared in both her journals and her records. Margaret, a stern and calculating figure, had once owned a failing antiques shop that inexplicably turned profitable after joining forces with Evelyn. Lillian, quieter but no less cunning, had deep connections in local real estate. Together, the three women formed a powerful circle, and Rachel seemed to have been caught in the middle of their affairs. Detectives began to suspect that Rachel may have uncovered secrets about these women, secrets dangerous enough to get her killed. The question was no longer who wanted Rachel dead, but how many of them had a hand in it. The more detectives examined the connections between Evelyn, Margaret, and Lillian, the clearer it became that their bond went beyond friendship or business. Interviews with former associates revealed hints of a pact formed years earlier, one that thrived on secrecy and shared ambition. Each woman brought something unique to their alliance. Evelyn used her wealth and charm to draw people in, Margaret handled logistics with a cold precision, and Lillian quietly tracked opportunities, identifying potential victims whose finances could be exploited. Together, they operated like a machine, targeting those who were vulnerable or too trusting to question their motives. Rachel Turner, with her sharp eye for numbers, had been a valuable asset at first. She kept their finances organized, laundering profits and hiding paper trails. But as time passed, she began to notice irregularities that could no longer be explained away as careless mistakes. Withdrawals disguised as investments, missing accounts tied to real people who had since vanished, and coded notes buried within Evelyn's records all suggested something far more sinister than fraud. Rachel realized that the three women were not just stealing money, they were erasing lives. Detectives pieced together that Rachel had likely confronted Evelyn about what she had discovered. Her journals contained brief, fragmented notes hinting at fear, Mentions of late-night phone calls, shadow of figures near her home, and cryptic warnings she seemed too afraid to share in detail. Investigators believed Rachel had threatened to expose the group, and in doing so, sealed her own fate. What struck investigators most was the calculated method of Rachel's murder. Poison was subtle and slow, a signature consistent with women who relied on careful planning rather than brute force. It was the act of conspirators who valued secrecy above all else, ensuring their deadly pact remained unbroken. Detectives thought they were closing in on the women with charges of fraud and financial manipulation, when an unexpected development shifted the investigation entirely. An anonymous letter arrived at the Millbrook police station, its handwriting shaky but deliberate. Inside, a single page described the location of a shallow grave hidden in the dense woods just outside town. The tip was too specific to ignore. When officers followed the directions, they uncovered human remains buried beneath the damp earth. Forensic testing later confirmed that the remains belonged to two women who had been reported missing years earlier, both of whom had once been connected to Evelyn Cross. The discovery changed the scope of the case overnight. The fraud and financial crimes were one thing, but the presence of bodies tied directly to the same social circle placed Evelyn, Margaret, and Lillian under far darker suspicion. Investigators traced the missing women's last known movements and found both had been lured by promises of business opportunities and friendship. Each had disappeared without a trace, their cases gone cold until now. What appeared to be clever financial schemes was beginning to look like a pattern of predatory behavior. The evidence also pointed to careful coordination. Witness statements suggested Evelyn played the role of the charismatic host, drawing victims into her orbit, while Margaret and Lillian took steps to isolate and control them. Once their usefulness ran out, the women vanished, leaving behind no witnesses and no paper trails that could easily expose the group. For detectives, the shallow grave was the turning point. It proved that Rachel's death was not an isolated act of greed or fear, but part of a chilling pattern of violence. These women had thrived in plain sight for years, hiding their darkest crimes behind wealth, charm, and carefully constructed lies. The trial of Evelyn Cross, Margaret Hale, and Lillian Price became one of the most talked about cases in Pennsylvania's history. The courtroom was packed every day with reporters, townspeople, and families of the victims who had waited years for answers. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of three women who, behind their respectable appearances, orchestrated a network of fraud, manipulation, and calculated murder. The evidence was overwhelming. Rachel Turner's financial records, journal entries, the poison traces in her system, and the haunting discovery of the buried remains in the woods. Each piece built a narrative of greed and cruelty that could no longer be hidden. Evelyn's defense tried to portray her as a misunderstood businesswoman, someone who had merely made enemies because of her success. Margaret's attorneys argued that she had been manipulated by Evelyn, while Lillian's claimed she was only guilty of poor judgment in her associations. But the prosecution dismantled these arguments, showing how each woman had played a vital role in the crimes. Witnesses came forward to describe intimidating encounters, strange disappearances, and unexplained financial losses tied to the trio. Bank records detailed their enrichment at the expense of others, while forensic experts testified about the poisons used with chilling precision. When the verdict was read, the courtroom fell silent. All three women were found guilty of multiple counts of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. Sentenced to life in prison without parole, their downfall sent shockwaves through Millbrook and beyond. For the small town, the case left scars that would not fade easily. People who had once admired Evelyn, Margaret, and Lillian now struggled with the realization that they had been living among predators. The story of these deadly women became a grim reminder that the most dangerous monsters can wear the most familiar faces.